Welcome to the Ellevate podcast, conversations with women changing the face of business. And now your hosts, Kristy, Wallace and Maricella, Herrera.
Hello and welcome to the Ellevate podcast. This is your host, Kristy Wallace, with my co-host, Maricella, Herrera. Maricella, how's it going? Are you almost ready for the big race?
Yes, on the running. I've been training. I'm very exhausted though. Very, very, very much exhausted. I don't know if it's because I've upped my training, so I'm doing hill runs and speed work, which I didn't used to do, or if it's just because the world has me tired. You know, the article about languishing that came out in the New York Times where Adam Grant describes that feeling of blah that a lot of us are going through right now. That's what I would say is kind of happening.
Yeah. I hear you. I mean, it is, I think we are all individually influenced by, in so many big and small ways, by the things happening in our world. I am excited that on the East Coast, it's getting some more sunshine and warmth. Certainly that's exciting. I'm excited that now my first grader is fully back in school. Mommy school, we had a big celebration. Mommy school is closed for the first time in over a year. So that was pretty great. But yeah, I mean, we just had, the George Floyd verdict, which was, I think, very emotional for many of us during that time. We've had, many other things happening in our world and a year plus of, the toil and toll of just a pandemic. So I hear you, Maricella. I know that it's been tough, but you know what? The upside is that you are supported and surrounded by some amazing people who really care about you. So hug yourself, feel the love.
That is very, very true. You know, I was listening to another podcast, not ours, Brene Brown, who, I mean, obviously, Brene Brown is Brene Brown, but on burnout. And it was the like hug yourself part. Like a lot of the talk from that podcast was about how you have to go through your emotions. And I know this. We know this, I think, of it's through, you have to go through the process of stress and emotions to really get out of it, even if it's painful. But one of the things they were saying that completes the cycle of kind of stress and gives your body the signal that stress is done. One of them is physical movement, which I think, that's why I run. Like that's what gives my stress the like signal of like, okay, we're through this. And one of them was hugging people.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I realized it's been a while since I've hugged someone.
Well, that's on our executive roundtable this week. The topic was fear and how to not let fear hold you back. And our guest expert said something similar, which she was having us kind of hug each other. And the idea is that, you can give your own that physical cue. You give that to yourself. And I don't think we do it enough. I mean, I never do it. I wouldn't even think about it. And then now twice in a week, I'm hearing you should give yourself more hugs. So maybe this is some people start meetings with meditation. Maybe we start meetings with hugs. I don't know. We'll have to plan for this.
I mean, this is why I own a weighted blanket, right?
Oh, well, that's true. And then the weighted blanket is a game changer. But I think you're going to love, actually, I know, Maricella, that you will love our guest today, Melody Wilding. She's the author of Trust Yourself, Stop Overthinking, and Channel Your Emotions for Success at Work. And wow, she's has such expertise. She's an executive coach for sensitive high achievers. And she really helps sensitive leaders escape self-doubt, imposter syndrome, and master their emotions. And I know you and I have had so many conversations around this topic and around this intersection of emotions and leadership and leading with authenticity and vulnerability, but also with, strength and conviction. And I don't know why even saying that out loud, it feels as if those descriptors are in conflict with each other,
Mm-hmm.
which I know is one of, the great tragedies of our time, is how we define leadership and what we believe strong leadership to be, and why that needs to be dismissed and dispelled.
I'm really looking forward to hearing this conversation, not only because as a highly sensitive person, I do appreciate a different look, but a different take on leadership. I also think there's so many different shades of how leaders can show up depending on their traits, I would say, or you know how they really are. But also because the stop overthinking, you know me. I am, and you're the same. Like, I will say both of us are very guilty.
I do.
Yeah. Overthinking is
Takes one to know one, Maricella.
in our nature.
But I think that there's, so I want to say I believe that there's beauty in that, because a lot of that overthinking, what is happening, unfortunately, at 3 a.m. in the morning when we're not sleeping, or in the back of our brains when we're running or showering or whatever it is, that is helping us to work through so much of the complexity of life and leadership and business. And that has served us incredibly well during this past year. If I were to look back at how you've led, how I've led, a lot of that, overthinking and intentionality, and really trying to look at the full picture across the myriad of, implications, and to come out at this on the other end, supporting our team, supporting our customers, supporting our business, and showing up in the world. You just need to overthink that a bit.
Yeah.
But it's tough.
It is tough.
Well, let's get to my conversation with Melody, author of Trust Yourself, Stop Overthinking, Channel Your Emotions for Success at Work. And I just want to stress for all of our listeners here, we try to go deep in a multitude of different stories and career trajectories, impact and inspiration, ideas and self-reflection, leadership, and beyond. We want this to be a place where you continue to be inspired, to grow, to learn, and most importantly, think about yourself and how you show up in the workplace, how you're getting that type of support and validation that you need. That's what Ellevate is all about, and we appreciate you listening to our podcast every week.
Thanks for listening, and give yourself a hug.
Melody, welcome to this edition of the Ellevate podcast. It is wonderful to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
I'm going to ask you to share a little bit about yourself and your story and how you got to where you are today.
Sure. So, professionally speaking, my background is as a researcher. I have a background in social work as well. So, earlier in my career was a therapist. And so I've always had an interest in understanding how other people think, how the world works. But also, all of my life have known that I am someone who is very affected by everything that is going on around me, and someone who thinks and feels everything more deeply. And when I was younger, I was always told, you're so sensitive, you take things so personally, grow a thicker skin, and didn't really have the language for it then to really understand that this was a very real trait, and instead really push that down in myself. And at the same time, being someone who was deep feeling and thinking, was also extremely driven. So I am that classic A plus gold star, good girl, live to exceed expectations in everything that I do. Got, good grades in school, went on to a good college, graduated top of my class, went to Columbia for my master's. So checked all the boxes and met all expectations, and really landed early on in my career, hit a very severe point of burnout, where one day I really found myself unable to get out of bed I was having heart palpitations, nightmares, my hair was falling out. And in the book, I actually tell the story of from that time period where I skipped one of my best friend's wedding weekends in order to work. And that whole time period was my crisis moment. It was my wake up call that I had really let my ambition and that high achieving perfectionist side of me become so unbalanced that it consumed me. But also, I had really let my sensitivity go completely unmanaged and unleveraged. Like I said, I was really suffering with people pleasing, saying yes too much, emotional overwhelm, overthinking everything. The stress was just depleting me. And that moment really opened my eyes to the fact that something had to change or else I was probably going to die, really. And was also showed me that I had everything right in front of me to change my situation. Just had to use my background in psychology and neuroscience and human behavior and take everything I had learned and use those tools on myself. And so from there, flash forward, now I have been coaching others in this area for 10 years, helping them do the same and really reach a point where they can turn their sensitivity into more of a superpower, overcome overthinking, and really regain their own confidence so they can lead more effectively.
Melody, I think you and I have a great. I know we have a great deal to talk about, and certainly a lot of similarities in our stories and backgrounds and in values and how we show up. I remember this moment earlier on in my career, and similar to you. I mean, my career was everything, top priority. I mean, I would say like the number one thing I thought about, talked about, breathed, lived, and I was a new manager and was relatively junior in my career, managing a sales team. And the first round of reviews we had, it was 360 reviews. And the person I reported into, who was the CEO of the company, told me I needed a thicker skin. And one of my direct reports said that I was too mean.
Mm.
And like that still sits with me today, because I think when you are, and someone who leads with empathy, someone who, really cares about the people that you work alongside, one, the opposing messages, and we can get into the whole gendered aspect of that, but it's also just feeling like you don't know how to be, right?
Mhm.
How do you authentically show up and bring your full self, and not have to, like you said, feel like you have to tamper it down?
Mhm. Yeah, this is a very real challenge for so many women because, as girls, we're brought up to be accommodating, obedient, don't step out of line. Whereas boys are socialized very differently. Take risks, be macho. That's not the case with girls. And what was interesting in my research for the book, I came across a stat that up to 45% of young girls by their teens say they are not allowed to fail. That's how much perfectionism we are raising young girls with, that we respond to stress by personalizing it, by thinking that it's our fault, excessively worrying. And that's even more so for the sensitive striver personality type, someone who is such a deep feeler and a thinker. So I think the first place that we need to start with being able to be more of our authentic selves in the workplace is questioning, is examining some of this conditioning that we're brought up with and unlearning.
Yeah. I mean, that's top of mind for me personally. When I've got I have three little kids, but my son and my daughter are at that lovely stage right now where they're just constantly, at each other's throats. And I have to be, and I'm very cognizant of this, but I have to be very aware of how I respond to that with them, and to your point about, the way that we address girls versus boys, and the language we use, the situations when we step in or try to control someone's behavior, it is so deeply ingrained in us that you really have to be cognizant of the ways that we're navigating this? I mean, do you have advice for parents or caregivers or those of us who are around to the next generation of, how to not reinforce some of these stereotypes and norms?
Yeah, I when I think back to what I had wished I learned differently as a young girl, it's really about being uh, having validity around my own preferences and needs and desires. And as a young girl in particular, you are taught to be polite, soft spoken, not you don't want to do things that will make people unlike you. So we give young girls a lot of direction around, well, maybe you shouldn't say that because someone may react poorly, rather than teaching them you have something important to say and it's important that you share that regardless of how another person reacts. And so I think encouraging young girls to do what feels right for them and not be um so attuned. In the book I talk about one of the qualities that sensitive strivers have is vigilance, and we can become so overly vigilant of our surroundings that we curtail ourselves from doing what's right for us, from pursuing things that are right for us. So having more confidence with putting your thoughts out there regardless of what another person's reaction may be, I think, is a very important one. And encouraging young girls to take risks. Particularly for me, I was, of course, raised as a young girl, but I'm also an only child. So my parents were in the best way, very protective of me. And I wished I had a little more nudging to do things that felt uncomfortable and maybe a little bit not unsafe, but just taking more of a chance.
Hmm. So let's talk more about your book. Share a little bit about Trust Yourself, Stop Overthinking, and Channel Your Emotions for Success at Work. It's coming out on May 4th. So we're really excited about this. And I would love to hear more about, the premise for the book and some of your top takeaways.
Yeah, so this book is really meant to be a roadmap to helping you get out of your own way and actually begin channeling your sensitivity for the superpower that it is. So, if anybody out there is someone who considers themselves an empathetic, driven person who is trying to navigate your way in your career, but also feel more confident and secure in yourself in the process, then this book is for you. And as I said, it really came out of my personal experiences, but also my professional experiences now, having been an executive coach for 10 years, working with people with this type of personality, really defining this personality of the high sensitivity piece, being a deep feeler and thinker with the high achievement piece, being very driven, setting a lot of goals for yourself. And so the book really defines this personality type, shares a framework for understanding your qualities as a sensitive striver, but most importantly, it's meant to be a guide. So the book really takes you through four different parts. The first part is about building self awareness in yourself as a sensitive striver. So, understanding your sensitivity, how it has shaped your career, and really letting go of some of the, as we were talking about, unhelpful conditioning around equating our self worth to our success and our productivity. In the second part, we move on to overcoming some of those most common self sabotaging behaviors. So, things like overthinking, emotional overwhelm, people pleasing, and not setting boundaries. Really go into depth in each of those areas. And as a coach, I cared a lot about making sure that this book was highly actionable. So, every chapter has very concrete, short action steps, but there are also more in depth exercises and worksheets that you can do when you have more time. Because I know what it's like to read a book and then feel like that was great, but now what? How do I actually translate this into action and change in my life? So I wanted to give people tools to do that. So, part one is about self awareness. Part two is self sabotage. Part three, we look at really creating your own definition of success. So in part 3, we start to zoom out and really look at your core values. How do you set goals in a more sustainable, healthy way, for example? How do you take risks in your career and expand your capacity to do hard things? And then the final section of the book, that is really about sustaining all of this great work that you've done. So how do you make sure you protect this, take it deeper and further on your path to success? And so there we talk about things like assertive communication and overcoming setbacks, those things that might get in your way and derail your progress, and really pay attention to those there and give you some tools for overcoming that.
Oh my goodness, I can't wait to dig into this. Could you share, and without giving away too much, I mean, you talk about this first part is the identification. And are there, one or two questions that our listeners should be asking themselves right now as they start that process?
Of identifying that they're a sensitive striver?
Yes.
Yes. I would say if you are someone who identifies with having big emotional responses, so if you are someone who has complex emotions, if you have a lot of feelings and then your feelings have feelings, you are likely a sensitive striver. We tend to have very rich inner emotional lives. So we have the richness of positive emotions like inspiration, excitement, gratitude. We're highly empathetic. So if you are someone who can instantly, have a pulse on the mood of a meeting or a slight change in your boss's body language, all great signs that you fall into this category, as well as being someone who is a deep thinker. Sensitive strivers, we tend to be people who anticipate every eventuality. So we're very observant, perceptive. We are taking in more information in our surroundings. We're processing that more deeply, which means that we synthesize it. We make original connections. So I typically find this with the sensitive strivers I work with that they will be the first one to have an idea, but they will be afraid to speak up about it because they will think to themselves, well, if no one else has mentioned this yet, then it must not be a good idea, without realizing that that's actually part of our cognitive ability. Having this trait of high sensitivity actually gives you that foresight and that ability to make those connections in a way that other people can't. So if you are relating to all of those, then I would likely say you are a sensitive striver.
I'm shaking my head here, and yes, I do. I absolutely relate. There was this story, I've told it on the podcast before, I believe, but when I also was more junior in my career, and I would be at senior leadership team meetings, and instead of speaking up, I would go back to my desk and email my boss my ideas, and then he finally said, I will refuse to read your emails and you need to speak up in these meetings. But I think a big part of it was, no one's had this idea. Is this valid? Is this, right? And just so much that you've said is relates to me. And as I think back about my career, I wish I had this framework before to help guide me. So thank you for that. On that note, like you then say how you share some insights on setting boundaries, which I think is we're talking about work and emotions and caring about other people, and so much of this, like boundaries become really hard to set because things, they meld together. What are some of your insights there? What should we be thinking about?
Yeah, boundaries are more important yet more difficult than ever because of the situation we're in now with so many more people working from home, literally having no separation between your professional life and your personal life makes boundaries really difficult. But in the book, I go through this process for really identifying where you need better boundaries, because often we just feel frustration or stress, but we are not pinpointing the exact situations that are causing that. So, this is where I think you can actually use your emotions as a superpower, and specifically as data that signals where you need to set greater limits. So, the most instructive emotion is resentment. If you have a strong feeling of resentment, you know, a 7 or above out of 10, 10 being the highest, that is a very good sign that that situation calls for a boundary. It's a sign that you have let something go on for way too long without addressing it in the way that you need to. So, for example, you might have said you would help a colleague out with some extra work. Now it's been 6 months, you're still doing that work and you feel really resentful. You can't even see that colleague on a meeting without your skin crawling now because you're just so frustrated and upset. Great sign that a boundary is needed. And so, whenever I work with clients and we start talking about this idea of boundary, we go through that step of assessing where these emotions are arising and then working backwards into, okay, what does that mean about the limit I need to set here? Where do I need to say no? How do I need to reset expectations or be more proactive about defining what's going to work better for me?
That's excellent. You mentioned leading through this time, and it's been a hard time, the past year, leading through adversity where, you have to make some tough decisions, where you have colleagues in the workforce that are struggling on their own way, with either loneliness or the impact of racism or just loss of family. I mean, and we could go down. There's a lot of things there. But what would how does this really come come to play in what you're talking about here, like the sensitive striver, and you're leading during this time where you personally are likely struggling, but you're supporting teams, you're making tough decisions, you're thinking about your customers. I mean, there's so much there where you could, I think, really be drained and impacted by this year.
Yes, absolutely. Because being highly sensitive, that part of the sensitive striver equation is about having a more attuned nervous system. And so we sensitive strivers, because we're empathetic, we tend to be a bit more spongy. We actually have more active mirror neurons in our brain, which are the neurons that are responsible for sensing other people's behavior and empathizing with them. So when we see someone in pain or hurt, we feel that more deeply than other people. So we literally take that on. And so, for so many of the clients I've been working with throughout the pandemic, really creating more processing time and more space for themselves has been something that we have to do. Because if you don't do that, you will very, very easily become overstimulated. And when you're overstimulated, it's much easier to fall into some of those self-sabotaging behaviors like overthinking, emotional overwhelm, just the all the side effects of stress. So really making sure that you are managing your level of stimulation. A big area that I've been working on with clients is just the endless amount of meetings that since we are in the pandemic now have really just proliferated. People's meeting schedules have just exploded. And so, really auditing that, seeing what meetings you can eliminate, take yourself out of, delegate to someone else, placing more buffer time between those appointments so you have a little bit of a moment to decompress, attend to yourself, close your eyes for a minute, do a quick 2-minute meditation, for example, but really respecting your body and taking care of it. Because if not, then as a sensitive striver, it's really easy for you to feel like you're on overdrive.
That makes so much it makes so much sense when you say it. Yes, yeah. So Melody, I'm curious. Writing this book, I know this is your first. But how did you get started? What was the impetus for this, and what was that experience like?
I had always wanted to write a book. Since I was a kid, have been a bookworm and when I was really young, would build forts and take a stack of library books and notebooks and just go in there and write all day. So the breadcrumbs of this were long forming. But really, the true impetus of this is I was speaking. I was at a speaking engagement once. And after I was done speaking, a publisher came up to me afterwards and said, "Hey, would love for you to write a book for us. Whatever you want to write about, we just want to work with you." I had not thought about writing a book at that point. I thought this was something that was way down the road in my career. And so when confronted with that reality, I had that rush of, oh, someone wants me. It was very validating, but in that very much in that not people pleasing type of way, but oh my gosh, someone wants me. They think I have something to say. And long story short, I ended up writing a version of the proposal that was the book I thought this publisher wanted. It was not me at all. I was trying to fit myself into the mold and contort myself into what I thought they would say yes to and like, which you might see a pattern here. And luckily, I have a very wise agent who said to me, I don't think this is the book you want to write. And my counsel to you is that you take a step back, you take some time to think about truly what is the book that you want to write and that you want to be known for and that you will feel comfortable talking about for 5 or 10 years. And thus commenced about 3-4 years of really thrashing with not knowing what I was writing about, writing versions of the proposal and just completely scrapping them. And so this was a very, very messy process. And all throughout it, it was because I was afraid. I was afraid to talk about this sensitivity, ambition, and some of the dark sides of both of those. Even though I had countered it, many of my clients had dealt with it. I was really scared to touch it. But again, had a wonderful team around me who just pushed me and encouraged me to keep going deeper. Every draft would say, there's something here, but this is not quite it. Go a little bit further, get a little bit more vulnerable and real with it, until out of a moment of frustration trying to figure out what the heck is this book about, I took a whiteboard and wrote down everything that my clients were facing and just started mind mapping, kind of grouping them into categories, and very clearly saw right in front of my face that, oh, it's the sensitivity piece, it's the thinking and feeling piece, but it's the striving piece, it's the achievement, the drive, the perfectionism, setting too many goals. Those two things, it came to me like a lightning flash: sensitive, striver. And even at first, I had a lot of doubt around that. Is this stupid? Is that even a real thing? Are people going to laugh at that? But the more I started to talk about it, share it with my audience, the more it just spread like wildfire. And immediately, as soon as you say the term, people gravitate towards it and identify with it. So that is the long story short about how we arrived at this point 5 years later now of writing this book.
I love that story. And that's a great process too. I mean, I would want to amplify that because so many of us are thought leaders or strive to share some of our knowledge with others, and it's easy to get stuck. And really leaning on your experiences and taking it from that perspective is brilliant. I love that. So, Melody, want to get to learn a little bit more about you. We are going to end with a quick lightning round. I'm going to ask you some questions and ask you just respond in a word or two. Are you an introvert or an extrovert?
Introvert.
What is your favorite day of the week?
I'm going to go with Saturday.
Are you an early bird or a night owl?
Former night owl turned early bird.
Aren't we all? Who's your dream dinner guest?
This one needs a little bit of explanation. I would choose my maternal grandmother, who unfortunately, by the time I was 2 or 3, had a stroke and was really unable to speak or communicate and passed away when I was in grammar school. I would love to have her as a dinner guest because I did not really get the opportunity to connect with her growing up.
Love our grandparents.
Yeah.
Do you have any pet peeves?
People who don't follow through really, really grinds my gear, since I am someone who is overly responsible and really true to my word.
Well, and that makes me think back to our conversation about, setting boundaries and like holding ourselves accountable.
Exactly.
So, yeah, I mean, it makes sense. You follow through for yourself and understand how others not doing so can be a pet peeve. something we can all strive to do better at.
Yes.
What would be your Monday morning staple?
Peloton.
Yes. Now, did you have a Peloton pre-pandemic?
I don't even have a bike. I just do the strength or the cardio classes. So once I have a bigger space, you better believe I will have a bike. But for now, that's all I can manage.
Okay. I heard Peloton's doing speed walking. You can do a speed walking class.
Oh,
So
I might do that. I used to be a speed walker, so I might do that.
Yeah, I feel like I've had a hard time getting out of the house now that this is where I work and live and everything else. So I maybe we can be accountability buddies on that.
Yes, I love that.
What is your favorite recent read?
I would say Chatter by Ethan Kross. A great book about really managing your inner voice.
What is your top self-care practice?
Epsom salt baths.
Nice. And then a final thought or question you want to leave with our listeners here today?
Your sensitivity, when managed correctly, can be your superpower.
All right. I think that is a great way to end. And for all of our listeners, if you want to check out Melody's book, Trust Yourself, Stop Overthinking, and Channel Your Emotions for Success at Work, it is available on May 4th and at all major retailers. Right, Melody?
That's correct.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today on the Ellevate podcast. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to Ellevate. If you like what you hear, help a girl out. Subscribe to the Ellevate podcast on iTunes, give us 5 stars, and share your review. Also, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at EllevateNTWK, that's Ellevate Network, and become a member. You can learn all about membership and all the great things that Ellevate Network is doing at our website, www.ellevatenetwork.com. That's ELLEVATE network.com. And special thanks to our producer, Catherine Heller. She rocks. And to our voiceover artist, Rachel Griesinger. Thanks so much, and join us next week.
Every business wants to engineer new possibilities, creating revenue, optimizing costs, and scaling technologies like cloud and AI. Start at Deloitte.com/US/cloud and find the services you need to get the value you seek. Deloitte.